Donald Trump is set to give what he calls a major speech on immigration Wednesday night. It'll cap a somewhat confusing 2 weeks for the campaign, where Trump said he'd consider softening his policies toward undocumented immigrants, only to say days later that he'd actually be hardening those positions. He also signaled he might support a pathway to legalization until he said he actually would oppose such a pathway. So, what might we expect to hear on Wednesday? Leslie Sanchez is with me from Los Angeles. She's a Republican strategist and CBSN political contributor. And Nomiki Konst is a Democratic strategist and also a CBSN political contributor. All right, Leslie, let me start with you. This campaign back and forth has built up anticipation for Donald Trump's speech, but why exactly is it so important for him right now?
We can all just point to the ghost of Republican past who have tried to navigate the delta between the hardliners who do not want to see any type of amnesty, they want to see a wall built, and then the rest of the Republican Party who's very much concerned about a compassionate, humane approach to dealing with immigration reform. So he really has to close that gap, and doing so is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do.
Nomi, let me ask you, if you were the Clinton campaign, what is it that you're going to be looking for in this speech?
Any inconsistencies, number one, pointing that out and saying he's flip-flopping. He's not flip-flopping between the primary and the general election. He's flip-flopping between Monday and Tuesday. And pointing out those inconsistencies just shows and furthers the point that he is not ready to be president. But it's not just about the flip-flopping. It's about understanding immigration policy. Thus far, he has shown no evidence that he understands the real crisis at the border, that he understands what immigration reform would look like, that he has any compassion for the people who would be affected by this immigration reform efforts, including those who would potentially vote for the Republican nominee. And I think it also paints a picture, the potential of the speech being more tough on immigration would paint the picture that he is in line with that alt-right that Clinton has been speaking of. That is not a majority of the Republican Party. It is a very far right-wing side of the party that I think the party's trying to move on from. But it's a small group of people, and they're not, while they may be very vocal and loyal to Donald Trump, they're not the ones who are going to win him the election in November.
Leslie, what about that point? Is there a risk here for Donald Trump in trying to maybe punch up the rhetoric a bit if that's in fact what happens?
Sure. No, I don't see this as inconsistency. This is going to sound straight. Not as inconsistency. I'm gladly welcoming his evolving on the issue of immigration and getting more serious about it. What these candidates have to do is present a framework. And within that framework, he's trying to say, look, I want to build a wall, you know, which is a great cheering talking point, but it obscures progression on the issue. And I think what it's going to come down to is the contrast between what he's going to put forward as a framework and what Hillary Clinton has done and her inconsistencies, which have gone on for years on immigration reform. She's paid and supported, or she's supported, I would say, that they put resources in on Capitol Hill for the fencing in 2006. Then she's talking about deporting, you know, a lot of the Honduran children when we had that massive flood across the border. I mean, she goes back and forth on compassion for Latinos. So what's interesting here is, can he approach this with what we say an iron fist with a velvet glove, strong but compassionate in comparison to policies we know don't work?
Leslie, as you well know, though, many of his detractors have pointed to what they call his bigoted rhetoric toward undocumented immigrants. Has his rhetoric made it difficult to take sort of that iron, what did you just call it?
Iron fist with a velvet glove.
And a velvet glove. I mean, you know, that seems like, on the one hand, if you soften a bit, it might make some folks a little bit more comfortable. On the other, for instance, if you talk about anything resembling a path to legalization, that's amnesty for many people, as you well know, having dealt with this issue.
Sure. No, Elaine, I think you're right on point that for some, that is all they will hear. If he talks about any type of legalization for any individual who came to this country, overstayed a visa, or is undocumented, there's a non-starter for hardliners. But let me tell you this. Conservatives, Republicans need to get used to the idea that that does not make sense. It is not a winning strategy. It is not a compassionate approach. More than anything, it's not going to solve the border security problems that we have. There needs to be a realistic framework, and that's really where he's starting to move. I want to agree with you on a point, though. He has done so much damage in terms of how he messaged this, talked about this, dehumanized people, that many Latinos are turned off. What this speech is about is compassion and trying to bring back independent, white women particularly, who when you close that gap and sound like you make more sense and are inclusive, you're going to help your Latino gap as well.
All right, so Nomi, with that framework in mind that Leslie just pointed out and trying to get those white women voters back, if Donald Trump in fact does pivot, how is it you think that Hillary Clinton's campaign might try to undermine a pivot?
Well, I think it's first thing, it's too little too late at this point. To pivot when you have such a record and reputation for the type of rhetoric, it's not just that he said a few things, it's that he consistently kept saying those things throughout the campaign. So to pivot at that point to win white women and independence would be a huge task. And what he's doing with the African American community right now by trying to embrace them, that's really an attack on Hillary Clinton trying to recruit minorities in states like Georgia. So if I were Hillary Clinton at this point, I would be talking about this. His strategy right now is not to actually change his policies. His strategy right now is try to twist his rhetoric so that he can have one foot in one court and another foot in the other court, and Hillary Clinton can just move forward and saying, we're the only ones who have a real plan. He is not providing real plans. One day he has a plan, the other day he doesn't have a plan, and then it's all coded in racism. I mean, the reality here is if you want to be compassionate, you have to be inclusive. And he's not being inclusive when he speaks about minority groups, when he speaks about families that have spent most of their lives in America working, paying taxes, being a part of the community. When he speaks about them and he's had a track record of speaking about them as if they are the others and that they should be sent back to where they come from. And there's nothing that he can do at this point to go back and turn that around.
All right, a lot of people will certainly be watching very closely to see what words he chooses. Nomiki, Konst, Leslie, Sanchez, thank you both so much. And we'll be bringing Donald Trump's immigration speech to you live on Wednesday night with full analysis after. That's at 9 p.m. Eastern here on CBSN.